Oi oi, it's your boy, the Bogdan Grad of Snogged Your Dad, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following what was looking like a banger card, turned out to be kind of a mid card. There was a good thing on there. I mean, I was very impressed by Adesanya Imavov. There were a couple of fun things on there. There was a lot of not fun things on there, if we're honest. But, you know, stuff to talk about. Another week rolls on. Next week's UFC 312, and that looks like really bad as a pay-per-view. But the fights might turn out all right, and if you're not paying $80 for it, you'll probably be quite happy. Probably not going long today because not a lot happened, but the most important thing, of course, is that Nasruddin Imavov announced his arrival in the middleweight division. I mean, if you've been paying attention, he arrived a while ago, but it always helps to get a big old name on your record, and to do it with an emphatic stoppage, you know, that's about as well as it can happen. I've seen a lot of people saying, like, oh, I feel old, Izzy's past his best now, it makes me feel old, and so on. And I was actually thinking about this. I wrote about Izzy for the first time after a glory kickboxing tournament back in, like, I must have been working at Fightland, so maybe 2015. And I said, this guy, it really impressed me. I love his stance switching, how he switch hits, how he moves offline to switch stances and then comes back in with his strikes, and how he uses his kicks to set up his switches, how he never switches straight in front of the opponent. This is going to be important later because that might have got him nailed in this fight. But we were also talking about the crossface he was using against, I think it was Ryan Thomas a lot. And Izzy turned up in the comments and was like, oh, love your stuff, Jack. Thanks for the kind words, blah, blah, blah. I am pursuing an MMA career. And I was like, oh, cool. Didn't realize he was pursuing it like directly alongside. And then wouldn't you know it, within the next year, he turns up in the UFC, I think. Oh, no, 2018 he turns up in the UFC. So he had a couple of years between then. And since then, he went on to become the world champion, defend it a bunch of times. Did have that little try at light heavyweight as well. You know, 6 defenses, lost the belt, re-won the belt. So a 2-time champion in the strict sense. All these people like Demetrius Johnson started trying to bill himself as like 11-time world champion or something. And that always made me angry because it's like, even if they gave you 11 belts, you were the champion 1 time and you defended 10 times. That's more impressive, but it's a different story. It's not like Muhammad Ali re-winning the heavyweight belt twice. I always think being a 2-time champion tells you that someone won it back, which is a really hard thing to do. You know, I think it was Floyd Patterson was the first heavyweight champion of the world in boxing to do it, and that's 80 years into the sport, or the existence of the title. It took a while, maybe 60 years, because people hit their prime, and then they end their prime, and then they start losing, and then they tend to keep losing, which is the sad part. And Izzy's career is a little bit like, we are now at that point where we're going, is he washed? And people are saying, is he washed? Is he, not is he? Because I was rewatching the Drickers fight ahead of this, and I said on the boycast, I thought he looked really good. I thought Drickers did some crafty stuff. I thought Drickers did some weird stuff, which seemed to throw him off. I thought he looked a bit slower, and that's why he was getting caught quite a lot. But, you know, he was throwing good combinations. He was answering what Drickers was doing quite well. He was exploiting with the uppercut and the body shots. I said, I don't think he's throwing enough, you know, the intercepting knee that used to be a big part of his game. I didn't think he threw that enough. And then, lo and behold, in the 4th round, he starts landing it really well. But, yeah, he just got bonked. And I was watching that going, like, yeah, maybe he's slowed down a bit, but I don't think there have been some catastrophic drop-offs in this sport. And the middleweight division is the best example of that, because you got Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold came up back-to-back. And then once they started losing, both of them just kept losing. Once Anderson Silva lost, it was like 5 in a row. Then he got a win over Brunson, and then it was another 3 in a row, 4 in a row, whatever it was. But, yeah, once he started losing, he kept losing. But never as bad as Weidman. Weidman looked terrible. So did Rockhold. Johnny Hendricks is another example in the welterweight division. These guys who, once they start losing, they just look horrible every fight. BJ Penn. All-time great in the lightweight division. You won't hear people talk about him because, sadly, while what you do once you're washed shouldn't affect how people remember you in your prime, it does. Guy ended his UFC run on like 9 losses in a row because he just wouldn't hang it up. And it was made worse by the fact that he's going out in Hilo and getting knocked out in street fights. You know, if you knock out BJ Penn, someone's going to have their phone out when you're arguing with him. So, yeah, that's sad. But anyway, first round, I thought Izzy looked fine. Thought he looked big. I knew he was a couple of inches taller than Imavov and had a couple of inches of reach on him, but I thought he looked like sizably bigger. I think Imavov is affected sort of in posture. The way that he stands is very slouched. Musashi-esque is what they call it. It's your monster dong pulling your shoulders forward. But of course, Izzy fights quite upright, does the very long sort of kung fu movie stance. And Izzy was doing what Izzy does with lots of nice switches of stance and demonstrating that principle that I said before at the start. When you be switching stances, do it in motion. Either hide it by moving to your left or right, or what Izzy does a lot is throw up from orthodox, he'll throw up the left high kick and then put it down behind him so that he's in southpaw, or throw a couple of punches and step through, or throw a couple of punches and step out the side and change stances. And that's how you do it without suffering from the fact that your feet have to come together and then they have to go apart again, and then you have to change what you expect because your stance has changed, so the angles of the opponent's blows are going to be slightly different. If you switch directly in front of someone, that's the perfect time to nail you. So a really, really good example of this in boxing that I bring up quite a lot is Gennady Golovkin versus Danny Jacobs. Danny Jacobs, I don't think they ever did a rematch, did they? No, they never did, but back when Golovkin was looking unstoppable, Danny Jacobs did a really good job. Lost the unanimous decision, but a large part of that was this knockdown. But he was doing this wonderful work off both stances. He'd walk back from one stance to the other, jab him off southpaw, walk back, jab him orthodox, and he looked really good. And at one point, Golovkin just managed to sort of corner him, but not really like push in on him. And Jacobs did a big step back into the opposite stance. He went from orthodox to southpaw, and Golovkin watched him. And the moment that he switched into southpaw, he threw a long right hand. The kind you would never throw against someone in the same stance as you. But you would throw a nice long right hand against a southpaw. And he threw it just before Jacobs had finished sort of getting in his stance and gone, right, I'm ready now, and nailed him perfectly. He threw to where he was going to be and knocked him down. And that's what you saw at the end of this fight. Basically, Izzy switched stances directly in front of him, and he went, right, go. And he'd done it in the first round, but he was a little bit slow on the trigger. Like, Izzy switched in front of him, and he went, huh? Oh, wait. And he did it, and he went, yeah, I see what you were trying to do, but we all saw that you were too slow there. But he got it perfect in the second round. Mickey Ward also had a fight like this. He used to switch from time to time in clever little ways. Who was he knocked out with a great body shot, switching stances? I can't remember. But then he fought some guy, and he just kept switching directly in front of him. The guy just hit him with the straight right hand on the nose every time he switched to southpaw. You got to be real slick with it. Not even slick. You just got to be disciplined. You got to say, right, he's going to have a hard time throwing punches at me if I just start circling to my left or right. When I'm circling, my feet can come level, and then I just step one back, and then whichever one you step back, you're in the other stance. If you watch Max Holloway versus Cub Swanson, that's a great example of like switching on the move. If you watch basically any Israel Adesanya fight, most of his switching is done on the move or done hidden by a strike. It's only in this one that he did a couple of really obvious switches. And he did step back. Like, pulling one foot back and then putting the other one forward is probably the worst thing you can do. Or doing like the Bruce Lee jump in place switch stances. Those ones are like unforgivably bad. If you step your lead foot back and you think you've got enough distance to, step all the way back into the other stance, that can be allowable. But if the guy's waiting on it and looking for it, you're still in trouble if he chases you. Really good for Imavov, though, because he is not really known as a big hitter. And now he's got a couple where he's banged people in recent memory. The Cannonier fight was a early stoppage in most people's opinion, but he showed that he could crack. That was sort of the problem in his career. He stopped Heinich and Shabazian, but you could watch him do these fights and you'd go, great 1-2, mate. Any chance you could stop him? And he never would. But I mentioned on the Boycast, Imavov's on this really weird run where by being competent, he's a good striker, not the most creative striker. He's an okay hitter, not like a devastating hitter. He uses his takedowns effectively, even though he's not like, in this division you've got Khamzat now. He's not Khamzat, he's not DDP chasing takedowns. He's just doing it when it's appropriate. And he's okay on the ground. And just by being competent in all areas, he had some guys freak out on him. If you watch the Dolidze fight or the Brendan Allen fight, two guys just, once they realize, he can do a bit of everything, they just implode. It's bizarre. Dolidze tries to hump him along the fence, and then he's like, I can't take him down. But I can't let him go either, because then he'll strike with me. So he just ends up hugging him. And Brendan Allen ends up pulling guard in an MMA fight in 2024. But we'll get into that later with Mike Davis, I suppose. Anything else that looked cool in this fight? Izzy's switches were good, aside from the ones that weren't. Imavov's front kick is always a good weapon when you see that in action. Thought Izzy's takedown defense looked good. Imavov did just fall on one of them, like he threw. It was maybe he watched the DDP fight. He watched the Duplessis footage and he said, "Do you know what? I don't want to bend my legs before I shoot. I'm going to throw myself at the floor." Because there's a great one in that DDP fight where Israel Adesanya versus Duplessis, where Duplessis is covering up along the cage and Izzy's starting to tee off. And you're going, oh, he's getting into this. And then Duplessis just dives at his foot like Sakuraba coming off the fence against Conan Silveira, the one that John McCarthy stopped and then later said, I didn't mean to do that. No contest. Let's do a rematch the same night. But yeah, he manages to fall on Izzy's leg in a way that straightens Izzy's knee out and forces him onto his bum. Unfortunately, Imavov didn't manage that because he was not crafted in the ways of DDP. I'm going to do a DDP film room later in the week, just a short one, because while he is a big, goofy dude with farm boy strength, he does some interesting things. Like what I'm going to talk about is this Tozy stack, or Sao Paulo stack pass, which is a brutal closed guard break / guard pass. He mauled people with the can opener from top position. Got great top half guard stuff, playing off the whizzer and elbowing people in the head. He's tricky. He's tricky. And in that Adesanya fight, I think what I said on the Boycast and what I think rings true is that he had a shorter reach, significantly shorter reach than Adesanya. He was shorter than Adesanya, and Adesanya does good retreats where he retreats and then he goes straight back and then he goes off on an angle, which is exactly what you should be doing. And still, he's getting caught and going, how did he get to me? And it's because he's over-committing so much in a way that people don't do against Adesanya because they're worried that they'll eat the knee, they'll eat a counterpunch, or even that spinning back elbow or something like that. Like, he was very good through his career at putting the fear of God in people. And then what Adesanya wants is not to, like, counter and hurt you. What Adesanya wants is to be left alone, and then to do his hip fake and his shoulder fake and then pump either the left straight or the left body kick. Those little series of fakes into actual kick or punch. Doesn't like throwing an awful lot of combos generally, but he just wants to be able to paralyze you and tee off. And that never happened against Duplessis because no matter how many times he hit him, Duplessis would go, right, getting that one back and run at him. Anyway, is this the end of Israel Adesanya? Is this the end of Israel Adesanya? If we're being dramatic, probably not. I mean, if he's on a great contract and he's getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a fight, he should absolutely see that out. I don't suppose he's thinking that he'll get back to the title right now. He seems to be very wealthy and happy. And he seems to not have the symptoms of very bad CTE. So if he wanted to get out now, you could definitely respect that. I think that the difficult thing is that because when you're on those big money contracts, part of what makes the UFC great is that there's no easy fights for anyone, really. Used to be. A couple more coming in nowadays, but the downside of that is that if you've got a good contract and you're earning good money, they're gonna Tony Ferguson you. They're just gonna be like, right, if you want to keep getting the shit beaten out of you, we will absolutely oblige. Meanwhile, for Imavov, he's in a pickle because he's probably the most deserving contender on stuff done, but Khamzat is obviously riding off that win over Robert Whittaker, which was so impressive, and also has a ton of hype and viral ability, lots and lots of followers. That's going to play into things. It also sort of depends on who's the winner of 312's main event, Duplessis versus Strickland rematch. If Strickland wins, Strickland's already got a win over Imavov in recent memory, and it was one of his better showings, especially when you consider the level of competition. Duplessis versus Imavov would be a fresh matchup. So, I suppose it depends on whether you want to sell a rivalry between Imavov and Strickland and if anyone cares. But God forbid they might even book a third fight. If Strickland wins, they might just do a trilogy, in which case Imavov's like, sorry, you've got to get your trilogy done and then you've got to have your Khamzat shot, or at least they do Imavov versus Khamzat or something like that. Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to plan what's going on in that division. But then I looked at the most recent fight announcement. It's Delidze versus Vittori 2 as a main event. Bugger my ass, isn't that a terrible... Doesn't that sound just like a terrible time If you watch the first one, that's a terrible time. Co-main event, also in the middleweight division, but not really a middleweight fight. Also in an MMA organisation, but not really an MMA fight. It was Michael Page versus Shara Bullet. I saw a few people, I was really surprised after this to see people going, oh, Hype Train derailed or whatever. And it's like, I was saying on the boycast before the fight, I forgot that Shara Bullet has an undefeated record, because I think most of us agree that it doesn't matter. Most of us agree that, like, if he meets anyone who touches his legs in a grabbing sort of way, he's going to fall on his bum and lose. And we all went, okay, cool, book him in weird striker-only fights. As long as he's not climbing the rankings, fine. But then I saw people who were genuinely like, oh my god, Hype Train derailed. It's like, had you seen him fight before? Did you think he was going to make a title run? But I think there's got to be a space for, like, fun fighters, which is why I wish the UFC would do the 4 ounce Muay Thai, because it's so enjoyable. And it gives these guys an excuse to not have to defend takedowns. But I thought one of the really funny things right off the bat was, even though a lot of people saw this as like a pure striking fight, when you watch Michael Venom Page lunge in with that right hand, which is basically his move, his one move, he falls in behind it and then he shoves the guy and tries to trip them over his leg. And a lot of the time he doesn't trip them over his leg, he just does it to get them stumbling and back off so that they can't counterpunch him. The reason you don't see people punch like that in boxing is because you would get counterpunched and you can't just, like, slam into the dude and push him over. Punch and clutch does exist in boxing. It's just you have to be a little bit more subtle with it than, like, leap in, smash chest to chest, try and trip their leg. But this one was crazy. I actually won some money on this, which is, you know, if I'm telling you I've won money, that's how rare I win money. But Michael Page had crazy odds on this. Genuinely, people must have been buying the Shara Bullet hype, which I didn't even think there was. But what did I get? It was like almost 2-1, more than 2-1 for him to win. I was looking at this beforehand, and I was talking about this on the podcast. I was like, Shara Bullet constantly backs himself onto the cage, which didn't matter an awful lot in this fight. But also, like, he's got no hands, and all his weapon is volume kicking. He's not out there like Jonathan Martinez going, I just need one low kick to strip the MCL and ACL from your leg. He's out there throwing 100 kicks around, which is incredible cardio, and it's incredible distance management, especially for a dude with one eye. But he's got no, like, his get out of jail free card is the back fist, which turned out okay in the last fight, but a lot of the time doesn't. And sometimes he grabs the head with the double collar tie, but he's got no hands. So he's just sitting, like, I mean, Michael Page, with the long stance, you are more susceptible to the low kick, but you're not, like, destined to eat it whenever the guy throws it, which I need people who talk about Jiri Prochaska to watch this fight when they go, like, he can't just change his whole style and learn to avoid kicks because he fights in a long stance. It's like, no, Michael Page was there going, he's going to kick my leg, and I'm pulling it away. And then every third time that Shara Bullet did it, he'd go, actually, I'm jumping up the middle with a punch. And that was the whole fight. The crazy thing was that Shara Bullet absolutely failed to adapt. He was there, he wasn't getting knocked out, he wasn't even close to getting knocked out most of the time, but he didn't ever change what he was doing. And by that, I mean, like, I'm not asking him to learn how to punch in the middle of a fight. If he's been on the pads for his whole career and never learned to punch properly, that's, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. But he does this thing where he raises a knee, or he does like a fake jumping knee, which is he just goes, oh, and he sort of floats in the air and then lands on his feet and lands a low kick. It relies on you going back. It relies on you going, oh my God, maybe he's jumping kneeing me. And he did it about 3 times in this fight, and Michael Page went, okay, and let him land and then punched him in the face. It was crazy. He was still acting like Michael Page was going to be terrified of him, and like he had the read on Michael Page. Donald Cerrone used to be like this. He would love it if every time he attacked you, you backed off, because then he would just start flapping his hands and sprinting into low kicks. But if guys didn't back up, he'd be like, oh, I don't know what to do now. But a lot of this was Michael Page leading him around the ring, going backwards and then popping him as he stepped in on a kick. Shara Bullet just had a terrible matchup for this fight. And Michael Page not only, I don't want to say boxed him up, because lunging right hands where you fall head first into their chest are not really boxing, but punched him basically at will, and then tied up and used the clinch whenever he wanted to as well. So even in like the striker's gentleman's agreement fight, he was like, I'm going to use a little bit of MMA here. And that was too much for Shara Magomedov. Oh, and then like Shara Magomedov would get him to the cage. I think this happened in the second or third round, but he gets him to the cage and he stands there looking at him and he goes, oh, I'm going to throw 2 half-assed jabs and then front leg side kick. That's like a poke. It's like, bro, you've got him against the fence. Fucking run at him. Do something. It's the one place he can't retreat. Just flap your hands and throw a low kick. Fake a low kick and duck in on a clinch. So great win for Michael Venom Page. I was watching a thing with him, an interview where he was saying like they asked him why he didn't have a flag next to his name, which I didn't even notice at the time. But he was like, I want to be from everywhere, which I thought it was Genki Sudo-esque. We are all one, which I thought was cool, given that it's just been a really tiring week in the MMA news cycle. Oh my god, the heavyweights on this card. Sergey Pav versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Classic Frozenstruik performance. I'm going to stand here and not do much. But Sergey Pav, oh my goodness. I think people were saying Tom Aspinall took his soul or whatever. But Tom Aspinall bit down on his mouthpiece and traded with Pavlovich, which was a really bad idea, but he still got the better of it, which is crazy. It was Volkov who came out and like Sergey Pavlovich couldn't touch him. He just went, look how bumbling this shaved ape is. He can't even reach me. I'm going to put my toes in his belly now. And it was 3 rounds of that. It was absolutely humiliating. And if you remember before that fight, Sergey Pavlovich was really mad. They were arguing over who agreed to fight first because they weren't going to agree to fight each other because they were teammates for a long time. And the UFC was sort of lying to them. And it was Pavlovich who was getting angrier. And I presume because he thought he might get shown up like he does or like he did in training. It really made it clear, like, doesn't matter how hard you hit, if you can't get close enough to the guy. And this fight, it just looked like he lost all his confidence. I mean, granted, he was on a 2-fight losing streak. If you lose 3, the UFC can cut you. But very rare if you're like an explosive heavyweight who actually tries that the UFC is going to cut you. There are probably not 10 heavyweights in the world who are better than Sergey Pavlovich, even if he's just swinging like an ape. It would be weird for the UFC to cut him. But he fought like he was absolutely shook. He fought like, oh my God. I mean, I know he came from wrestling as a background, but he's just throwing some strikes very occasionally. Rozenstruik managed to trip over himself twice, and then Pavlovich would sit on top of him, not doing an awful lot, and got a unanimous decision over 15 minutes, and everyone booed. The exciting fight on this card was Vinicius Oliveira versus Said Nurmagomedov. Really cool in the lead up to this one. These guys were playing ping pong at like the pre-fight press events, which I think is really cool. Said Nurmagomedov was an odd one because people lump him in with the Nurmagomedovs and they're like, oh my God, can you believe he lost? Oh, Dagestan on suicide watch or whatever. It's like, yeah, he's lost loads. Rani Barcelos made him look bad. Jonathan Martinez made him look bad. Even that one he won against Kakramanov was making him look bad. But he's a good fighter. And Vinicius Oliveira, obviously coming off that win over Ricky Simone, who may be washed, but was on the top of his game like 2 fights ago. They opened up like the house was on fire, and then they slowed way down by the second and third. But it was a good, entertaining fight. I thought they both looked good. They were scrambly as hell. The striking was interesting. Nurmagomedov was throwing up whippy kicks that were looking dangerously close to Oliveira's face. I mean, Oliveira took a back kick to the head in like the opening minute of this fight and just went, okay, right, back to work. So even if not the best showing defensively, he definitely looked like he can take a great shot. I think the really interesting part of this one was, we all know that they're all tough as nails, and also adrenaline makes a big difference, but Vinicius Oliveira finishes the fight, shakes Nurmagomedov's hand, I think they were still on the mat, and smiles at him, stands up, turns around, they change camera angle, and he like almost burst into tears, realizing how much his rib hurts, because between rounds he'd been like, I think I broke my rib, to his corner, went back out like nothing was wrong, and then as soon as the fight's over and he realizes that he's not in a fight anymore, he was like, oh my God, I'm in so much pain. I don't think he even got his t-shirt on all the way because he didn't want to lift his arms up, but yeah, that was rough. But he won the fight. He got the win. And I thought they both looked good in this one. I thought that this was probably the bright spot on the card. Fares Ziam versus Mike Davis. I was really looking forward to this one because Ziam's on a great run. And Mike Davis is always super impressive, but only fights like once every year. And that's due to injuries and things. It's not like he's taking the UFC's money and just being like, right, I don't need any more for the year. I can live off that. I would love that skinflint UFC fighter who doesn't fight enough because he's like, I can make that last. That was my theory about Loma Lookboonmee. She only fights once a year, and I think it's because 10 and 10 buys an awful lot of cigarettes in Phuket. But she's got one booked later this month. Anyway, this was proper sketchy. You know, I'm always talking about like changes of behavior. That's how you tell if a fighter's hurt. If they've been super aggressive and then suddenly they eat like a right straight to the body, a punch that no one ever notices and no commentator ever talks about. Front kicks is always the one. They just ignore them. Tony Ferguson made a career out of front kicking people. And if you only listen to the fights, you wouldn't know he even threw front kicks. But yeah, when you see someone change behavior, if they were throwing a lot and suddenly they're not throwing, if they were going forwards and suddenly they're taking a little step back, if they were shooting takedowns, now they're not. Like, these are all changes in behavior that can tell you something happened a minute ago. What's weirder is when fighters come out and do something that's just completely bewildering and out of their skill set. You either think, oh, they saw something in the tape and they're going for like a fancy trick play, which can happen, but more likely you go, are they injured? Or like an old boxing journalist would be like, is the fix in? But yeah, I watched Mike Davis come out and pull guard immediately. And even though he did a good job trying to attack from there, I went, this dude looks injured. And then I found out afterwards that the betting line shifted significantly over the 2 days before the fight. And I thought, is James Krause back? Because James Krause hit on the technically illegal but morally correct method of collectivizing fighting. What he did was he said, boys, we're all poor. In the UFC, you have to fight injured a lot. Unless you're from Eagles MMA. Part of their great strength is that if they are injured, they just pull out of the fight. A lot of guys will just fight injured because they have to for money. He said, if you're going to fight injured, all the boys have to know because we're going to bet against you. Allegedly. This is allegedly the formula. This is me doing dramatic reenactment. Don't sue me, James Krause, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. He disappeared pretty sharpish. It was like, is he going to federal prison? And it's like, no, they actually don't want to draw too much attention to this. What he's going to do is quietly leave forever. But yeah, it was like, yes, it's illegal, but is it immoral to tell your homies that you're going to fight injured and be like, well, if you want to make a few quid off me losing, because if I win, we'll all just be happy anyway. But I'm not saying that happened here. I'm just saying, if you were looking for a fight where that possibly happened, this is the sort of fight it would look like. Dude just fighting in a way that he's never fought before. Pulling guard in big 2025. So strange. And the sad thing was that he gave it a good fight. He gave it a good crack. Like, he, not just playing guard, but like throughout the fight, he was shooting bad takedowns and you were watching him going, this dude's really strong. And I've seen him just manhandle people. I get the Ziam's very good, but like the moment he touched Ziam, he would run out of steam and sort of fall to his knees. And he was barely striking. And the thing that he's been known for is that he beats people up on the feet. Now, granted, I think some of his wins are, because they've been so dominating, people lose track of the fact that his competition wasn't always the stiffest. And Ziam is a guy at the height of his powers. But just the whole way he fought in this fight was very strange to me. And that, there's no saying that he didn't just get spooked by the occasion and the quality of the fighter he was against. It was just that if he hadn't pulled guard in the first, like 3 times in the first 2 minutes, I would be more inclined to go, yeah, he got spooked by Ziam. Once he felt how strong he was, once he got snapped by a couple of jabs and couldn't see him coming, he got spooked. But the 3 guard pulls in the first 2 minutes is so strange. So strange. And then I think he actually said afterwards that he was fighting pretty significantly injured. Which, would all add up with like the 1 fight per year, multiple pullouts due to injuries in between those. The guy's trying to get fights in, and to do that, sometimes you have to do it injured. And, depending on how you're injured, you can't fight the fight that you want to fight. But I saw someone say this was the most unusually violent fight they've ever seen. And it kind of was, because Davies got split open with was it a knee to the brow? And it wasn't in danger of stopping the fight at any point, unless it was for like blood loss, because he was just gushing over the mat. And then he managed to do a little leg reap, which we're always talking about in terms of using leg locks in MMA. but to turn Ziam away, and he almost came up behind him into a calf slicer. And then Ziam turned back into him, and it was a lot like what happened with Charles Oliveira versus Kevin Lee. Charles Oliveira was using these knee reaps to get Kevin Lee facing the other way. Kevin Lee would turn back into him, like against his own knee, and it looks horrible. I think Kevin Lee said that did him some pretty significant damage to his knees, that fight. But Ziam, his heel was up next to his hip and then moving past in front of his hip, and everyone was going, "Oh, that's gross, bro." And he would do a little grimace, and then he'd go, "No, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing." Oh, and then he'd go, "Oh, it's nothing, don't worry." And he to be fair to him, he kept working, he kept striking, he kept squirming, and then managed to slip free. And the commentators were like, "Is it the blood that helped there? do you just have to wait and use your opponent's blood as lube?" Is it Gerald's Game? Yeah, Gerald's Game, the Stephen King book turned Netflix film with that hot MILF in it. She uses her own blood to slip through the cuffs that she's tied to the bed with. But in MMA circles, Gerald's Game is throwing punches really slowly, leaning back, and then trying some bullshit takedown into armbar. Oh, I forgot to do like a what's next for the winner and what's next for the loser in all these fights. For Michael Page versus Shara Bullet, I think the winner, Michael Page, now has to fight a real MMA fighter in a real MMA fight, where they might attempt a takedown. And the loser, Shara Bullet, as punishment, has to fight someone who might try a takedown. For Sergey Pavlovich and Jairzinho Rozenstruik, I think probably exile. I think probably exile to Siberia for both of them. Wait, isn't Pavlovich from Siberia originally anyway? Oh no, he's from Moscow. Send him up to the gulags. What else we got on this card? Shamil Gaziev actually gave the only good heavyweight moment of the night by punching this random dude in the face right off the bat and knocking him out with basically the first punch landed. Terence McKinney came out like a house on fire against Damir Hadzovic, got taken down, used a nice guillotine to turn him over, and just started punching on him from the top. Bogdan Grad had some of the worst striking I've seen in the modern UFC. He's out there pointing his elbow at the guy and like trying to backfist him, doing the wanky hand gesture. But he did get on top and beat the piss out of him. And then Hamdi got his first win in the UFC, which I think it was John Gooden on commentary said, gets his first win in the UFC. And you could almost hear the guy in his ear screaming, "Do not elaborate! Do not elaborate!" Because Hamdi's first win in the UFC was a split decision that again got overturned because of all the roids he was taking. But that was back under USADA. You would hope, especially as a heavyweight, they called him a couple of months later and said, "Look, don't get off him just yet. Watch how this plays out," because the UFC now does its own testing, which of course means fuck all. The last notable instance of someone getting caught for drugs in the UFC was Khalil Roundtree self-reporting. And that's only because he's a nice guy. And they said, "Do you know what? We'll sentence you in a minute." And then they went, "Oh, we need someone to lose to Alex Pereira next month. Good news, your sentence is up just before then." So this card was mid. I didn't find it too amazing, but it was. Well, I mean, it was on at a reasonable time for me in the UK, so I enjoyed that. And nothing else really was happening in the MMA world this weekend. Boxing-wise, I think the big story, the one that certainly I talked about most with people I know who don't really follow boxing, was that dude who turned up in Timberlands and jean shorts, which was, of course, Stephen Fulton. But he lost to Inoue last year. And was that last year? No, it was 2023. And he came back and he beat Figueroa for the second time in their careers. And more decisively, won the WBC featherweight title. And everyone went, "Oh, no, maybe actually Inoue is a generational talent and we shouldn't just assume that everyone who loses to him is cooked forever." But I think the really interesting thing about that, like everyone's talking about the Timberlands and the jean shorts. I showed my wife and she was like, "Oh, those are great. You're going to get some," because I love just buying all sorts of stupid no-gi gear, Muay Thai shorts and things like that. And I said, ironically, those probably cost quite a lot of money because they'll have been custom made to look like jean shorts and Timberlands, because you could not box in Timberlands. Not only would it be really hard, but I think it would probably be illegal. And so they went to a lot of effort making them look like Timberland boots. But I love that. You know, you don't get that in MMA. In boxing, you get your own seamstress. You go like, "I want this and this," and they go, "You want leather shorts, Floyd Mayweather. You're aware you're going to be boxing for 12 rounds, right?" And Floyd Mayweather goes, "Yes." And then he gets the clammiest thighs of his life fighting some randomer. I think that was Zab he fought in the leather shorts. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. I'll be back on the Boycast later this week to chat about UFC 312, possibly all the stupid drama with Bryce Mitchell and Conor McGregor and whoever else said some dumb shit. Badr Hari did another assault. Just, what a stupid time to be in this sport. But yep, sign up to the Patreon for all that, and I will catch you next time. I'm your boy Jack Slack, skipping over the Mayra Bueno Silva fight because I didn't watch it, bless.